Hey everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again. Now it's time for episode 206 of Album of the Day, in which for today's album review, I'm going to be talking about the latest album from a Virginia-based indie rock band, or at least their frontman's from Virginia at least, that sort of started out as a musical indie rock project for Virginia-born singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist Mr. Will Toledo, who put out a bunch of albums under this name, Seat Headrest, which is the name of the band. Releasing a bunch of those albums recorded by himself on Bandcamp before eventually signing with Matador Records in 2015 and putting out Teens of Style and then Teens of the Nile. And now I'm here to review their most recent third release for Matador, which was released on February 16th, 2018. And the album is called Twin Fantasy Face to Face. And as you can see, seeing the front cover of this album, you can see that this is a remake of the 2011 Bandcamp re-release Twin Fantasy that was really lo-fi but did have a lot of heart about it. That sort of made it his most popular album released on Bandcamp to date. And as you can see, I have this on vinyl. There's the track list there. It's a double LP, 10 songs, but it clocks in at over an hour and 11 minutes. So it's definitely a pretty long album, but definitely worth it, and I will say why as I continue the video. It's got a couple of lyric sleeves, which I always love it whenever they include the lyrics in the vinyl. Side A and side B. Standard black vinyl. And I should show you this as well. It's got a gatefold, which I love me a gatefold, so hallelujah, they include a gatefold here in this album, which basically has like a little bit of artwork there, some credits, stuff like that. Which I do have their previous record, Teens of the Nile, on vinyl, and it includes this beautiful gatefold that has handwritten lyrics in it. And then here's the other sleeve and the rest of the lyrics. And here's side C and then side D. And I love how these gatefolds these sleeves are also called mirror to mirror and face to face, sort of representing how the original Twin Fantasy album has been renamed to Mirror to Mirror, to confuse with this one, which has been called Face to Face. And that's the vinyl packaging for Twin Fantasy Face to Face. Now, if you've been watching my channel for the last couple of years, you know I've been a pretty big fan of Will Toledo and Company's most recent studio works, and specifically their 2016 album, Teens of the Nile, which certainly was, in my opinion, the best indie rock album of 2016, and certainly one that was like critically heralded across the board. Like Rolling Stone put it as like the 4th best album of 2016 and stuff like that. So when I heard they were coming out with a new record, of course, I was excited to hear it. But then I did find out that it was a remake of an older record, so I was a bit skeptical, but then like curiosity kind of rose out of me, and I decided, well, maybe I should check it out sometime. And I would say this, that for a remake of an older album, Twin Fantasy Face to Face is an improvement on all fronts. Because also my skepticism probably also had to do with the fact that I never really cared for the original Twin Fantasy. I thought it was a bit too lo-fi, so much so that it kind of interfered with what quality the music had to offer. So I'm pretty happy that hearing this repurposed version of it, the production sounds miles better. And because the production sounds miles better, I'm able to comprehend the lyrical content a little more here on this album, which is a big plus for me. The album, of course, opens up with the song My Boy, Twin Fantasy, which is basically just an intro track for the album with a mantra of, my boy, we don't see each other much. It'll take some time, but somewhere down the line, we won't be alone. And I love how he kind of, Will Toledo ups his vocal range throughout the song. Like, at first he sounds really kind of dejected and monotone when he sings it, but then he, starts hitting high notes and sounded really beautiful over some slowly building guitars, bass, and drums. But then he just, goes nuts singing it for the final time towards the end of the track. So it's definitely a kind of, simple but yet very satisfying intro for the album. Before it goes into the next track, the 13-minute epic, Beach Life and Death, which I'd have to say is probably my favorite track on the album, which it's in 3 different sections, and the first section features sort of imagery of our hero here at a train station, basically just kind of lonely, and then when he sees the train coming, he feels a little more comfortable, he wants to put his arms around this big and powerful kind of transportation device that he sees, but then the conductor looks at him funny, and he's basically just in this phase of losing his mind and sort of repeating to himself stuff of what should he do, and where can he go, and stuff like that. And also some great production in this section as well. Amazing drumming on the song, and the guitars sound really kind of fuzzy and peppy, and definitely there's some great energy to this track. Just like with most of the recordings off of the Teens of the Nile record. It's a record, and one of my favorite lines in this part is when he says how he was with his friends on Skype, and he laughed and changed the subject, and this one girl says, "What's with this dog motif?" And then he says, "Do you have something against dogs?" Dogs. And I also love the part where he just kind of shouts, "I don't want to go insane, and I don't want to have schizophrenia." Basically sort of displaying his sort of insecurity in a very powerful way. One of the reasons why emo is pretty admirable to begin with. Before it transitions into this more somber section with very intricate drums and gorgeous guitar noises and atmospherics. And he opens it up with the very haunting line of, "Last night I dreamed he was trying to kill you. I woke up and I was trying to kill you." It's sort of in this phase where he finally sees another version of himself after all this time as kind of a lonely, sort of dejected bum. And it's got a very beautiful chorus of, "We said we hated humans," so as well as the kind of funny mantra of, get more groceries, get eaten. Get eaten. Definitely a pretty fantastic midsection for the song. But then it eventually goes back into kind of the chaos of the earlier part of the song in part 3. But opening up with that same line from part 2, which I do think is pretty cool. And then there's this one pretty interesting verse of like how the ancients saw it coming. You can see that they tried to warn them in the tales that they told their children, but they fell out of their heads in the morning, sort of telling them that sex could be frightening, but then of course because they're sort of too young to really listen, they just basically cut out everything except for the kissing and the singing. Singing. And singing. And also I do love that part where he says, please let me join your cult. I'll paint my face in your colors. You had a real nice face. I had an early death. And then of course it does close out with the very memorable mantra of the ocean washed over your grave, over a kind of noisy, chaotic, and amazing indie rock instrumental. The next track is called Stop Smoking, We Love You, which is basically like a little interlude with the mantra of stop smoking, we love you, and we don't want you to die. Basically, Will alone with an acoustic guitar. Which it does work as kind of tying the whole album together, I guess, but this is kind of my least favorite track on the album because it's a little oversimplistic and just kind of feels like kind of a little bit of a filler moment. But following that lull is the track Sober to Death, which is one of my favorite tracks on the album. Which some great production on the song. Opens up with these schmaltzy acoustic guitars and pianos, and it does sort of talk about the insecurities that our hero is feeling now that he's sort of seeing that other version of himself, even though he's like feeling sober and sober and everything seems kind of normal at first. But he does sound just very kind of like uneasy when he says stuff like the final terror is in your box somewhere, hiding in boxes behind closed doorways, which is bound to give any sort of adolescent who like always kind of feels that way will definitely give them goosebumps for sure. Sure. And also, it couldn't be more insightful than the line of good stories are bad lives. And also, there's a pretty funny verse at one point where he talks about how if this other person's going psycho, he wants to hear it. Every conversation just ends with you screaming. Not even words, just... And then, of course, he sort of sings those sort of noises that would typically made whilst screaming, but making it sound so awesome and very kind of compelling on here, over in indie rock, over the driving indie rock instruments. The next track is called Nervous Young Inhumans, which was sort of the teaser single released prior to this album. And another great track. It opens up sort of unexpectedly with the line of, "You should have seen my cursive back then. Every letter was above the line. My P's and Q's raised their stems, so nothing crossed beneath. I'm a little better now." And then also another very Will Toledo-ian line on here is, "You swore you'd never use the face that your ex invented, so let's meet up in Uncanny Valley." So like the song may have kind of a more kind of straightforward kind of chorus, but those lines in the verses are definitely pretty clever and poetic. And also great production to hear. Love that peppy whizzing synth hook that plays amongst the kind of disco-inspired groove throughout the song. But then the song eventually falls apart into this really melancholy, but yet kind of cool spoken word part, which I highly recommend cranking up the volume for this part, or otherwise it may kind of pass you by as kind of a filler moment. But he says at the beginning, I am a good person, I am a powerful person. But as he continues on in this rant, you can tell that he is just basically kind of in a moment of just kind of intense anxiety and stuff like that. And he's sort of asking himself stuff like, how about, how many months are there exactly in a year? It's almost Halloween. I haven't done shit this year. And his kind of, sort of dejected attitude in this part is, kind of entertaining. The following track, Bodies, I'd have to say is probably my second favorite track on the album, next to Beach Life and Death. This song features some pretty outstanding production on here. I mean, the layering of guitars on here is just outstanding over some really inspired drumming from Andrew Katz here on the track. And I love how he follows up that spoken word part from the previous track with the line of, that's not what I meant to say at all. I mean, I'm sick of meaning, I just want to hold you. I mean, even just saying it sounds kind of satisfying, huh? And I love how he sounds so self-aware that he's willing to say stuff like, is this the chorus yet? No, it's just the build-up of the verse. So that way when the chorus comes, it'll be more rewarding. And sort of now feeling some slight desire to, dance with this other version of himself, and sort of also ad-libbing and saying stuff like, we're young, we're thin, most of us, we're alive, most of us. And then, of course, it goes into this incredible chorus of, don't you realize our bodies could fall apart at any second? I am terrified your body could fall apart at any second. And it goes so well over the really kind of peppy, energetic instrumental, which not only is the guitar and drums on here really cool, but there's also all these other keyboard elements sort of creating a nice little bed for the song as well. Making it sound kind of like indie rock mixed with disco. Let's go. But then eventually Will Toledo goes into themes of sex in the track Cute Thing. But he definitely sounds really confident while singing about this subject here on this track when he just belts it out when he sings, Cute Thing! Don't be rude thing! Over some really nice production that features a very smile-inducing keyboard hook along with some kind of bluesy and kind of loose, jammy riffs. And also, I do love the part where he says, God, give me Frank Goshen's voice. And James Brown's stage presence. I will be your rock god while you're rolling the dice. And your dice. And also, I love that middle part where we do have a pretty awesome guitar solo, which definitely is a perfect example of just the band having fun in the studio. And also the part where the instruments dissipate into these really catchy vocal parts is pretty cool as well. Before the song ends with this very very clever verse of, he died in an explosion of mixed media and poorly written reviews, and some stammering drunk who tried to tell him how good his shit was. And I really like how he's basically kind of slurring his speech, saying that's some good shit, man. As well as dropping in a pretty clever reference to the They Might Be Giants song, Anna Ang. The next track, High to Death, is basically kind of the melancholy, sort of heavy sequel for Sober to Death, where basically he finds himself basically very high and drunk and basically just kind of wishing he was sober, but he can't get up, and he's sort of in this phase basically just feeling really kind of scared off by this kind of situation that he's in, because he's never felt this happy or this sad before. And he definitely sounds very hopeless as he says, it's the middle of the night and I'll never be alright again. And this wallpaper keeps going round the room. And to follow up the Stop Smoking track, he says the opposite, keep smoking, I still love you, but I don't want to die. Over some very gorgeous instrumentation featuring kind of backwards guitar noises, it sounds like. And then another line that's bound to send chills down your spine is when he says, I sat there on the steps, considering death. There were only seconds left of the night. And I said, hell is the sun, burning forever at the center of things. And then the song ends with basically this clip of a woman, actually this teenage girl who's a senior in high school, basically talking about how he did this collection of paintings called The Ladies, and he didn't really feel that happy with the way it turned out, because she was just trying to kind of sort of figure out a way to kind of manage her own sort of anxieties and insecurities that she faces all the time, whilst going through his high school years, because your high school years tend to be kind of your prime suffering, tend to be the prime suffering years for some people. Then the next track is yet another long track, which is the 16-minute Famous Prophets. But don't let its 16-minute runtime fool you. This is one of the best tracks on the album. Which the song opens up with this very instantly catchy indie rock groove over lines of I'm not going to end up a nervous wreck like the people I know who are nervous wrecks. Though I'm not going to name names, yours was an exception. But then it eventually transitions into this very gorgeous midsection, and I like how in the lyric sleeve it mentions the first verse in this part as passionate, and then the second verse as harrowing, before going back into the very nice ocean washed over your grave mantra, which does get repeated a lot, but it does sound very catchy, and it goes really well when over Will Toledo's lead vocal, as he says, so descend into cliche, if you found your holy grail, I could fill back in that grave, and I could hammer in that nail, because the song also does sort of talk about death and stuff like that. So its subject is pretty heartbreaking, But then this song has a really interesting final section, which starts out with some melancholy piano before it eventually transitions into this spoken word passage that's sort of credited in the liner notes as some sort of it looks like some sort of passage from the Bible, but in reality it's kind of this made up sort of passage, sort of dealing with love, and read by this and read by like what sounds like a young girl or something like that. And you can't really hear it at first, but as the song builds up, you can hear it a little more, and you'll find some really beautiful poetry before it transitions into this awesome, explosive ending where the driving rock instrumentation is paired with these sort of blaring funeral horns, which just sounds very like chaotic and gorgeous at the same time. Before we hear the last part of the spoken word passage, which closes out with, "Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these two remain," before it eventually closes out with the song Twin Fantasy, "Those Boys," which is basically sort of saying, even though this Twin Fantasy is pretty much dead by now, the show ain't over. They're just going to keep on going forever, off into the distance, which are like these two brothers and lovers and their smooth-cocked adventures, which goes really well over somber organs and kind of fragmented drums and guitar patterns throughout the song. And Will Toledo basically closes out the song with saying that this is the end of the song, but like these are only lyrics now, and he sort of goes on and on about how the names have been changed and the contract is up and stuff like that, before he closes out the song with "When I come back, you'll still be here." Yeah. So overall, definitely, he turns this like his most popular Bandcamp release, Will Toledo, that is, and really turns it into this very intriguing and kind of sprawling concept album that is definitely one of the best indie albums in the year, which is definitely pretty obvious thing for me to say, as I think 2018 has actually been a pretty amazing year for indie music overall, like in rock and pop and whatever. And this is one that, like, I highly recommend it. Like, whether you're already a fan of Twin Fantasy, or if you even if you didn't really care for the album initially, I think you'll really like what's happening on this new version. Great production, great writing. It's intriguing how Will Toledo kind of goes back into his youth and really sort of gives it sort of a new sort of revitalization, enough to make me want to give this album an 8 out of 10. So that's my review of the new Seat Headrest album, Twin Fantasy Face to Face. And it's time, and I'll see you for episode 207.